Welcome to Sexology, a podcast that untangles the science of sex and pleasure. And now, with this week's episode, your host, clinical psychologist, Dr. Nazanin Moali.
Hello there. Welcome to episode 100 of Sexology Podcast. My heart is full of joy because we reached this huge milestone. When I started thinking about launching this podcast, I had so many fears. I was telling my fellow podcasting group, I am part of the podcasting group with other mental health providers, that what if no one want to listen to what I have to say? What if people will troll me? What if I get horrible emails? And all of these fears that I had when I was thinking about launching a podcast. And because of you and all the encouragement that you guys gave me in past 2 years, I've been recording this show every single week. And I truly think it is an honor to be able to reach this many people. And I would love to continue doing that. And I appreciate if you support me with this by writing your honest review in iTunes. We have so far 95 reviews on iTunes. And I would love it if you can help me to reach number 100, because the more reviews we get, we'll be able to reach a broader audience because it increases our visibility. In today's topic, we're going to talk about what actually makes a guy good in bed. When it comes to this topic, I believe there's so much misinformation out there. And, in my practice, I see the disconnect between the image, the stories that guys telling themselves, and what really my female clients talking about what they want. And similar thing with my friends and families. And I truly believe it's really important to focus on what actually matters. Because, in our society, there's just so much pressure on guys to perform certain way, to be a sex machine, to be able to have sex and demand. And that's not how it is for many men. And I think it is an important message to talk about what really women want. And yes, because I'm a heterosexual female, this episode I'm going to talk about a heterosexual relationship because that's something that I know the best. And we have a very special guest in this episode. If you are the listeners or long-term listeners, you might remember our very first show with Dr. Albert Wong. He's my friend and colleague. We did our postdoc together. He's an excellent sex therapist. We talked about sex and mindfulness. And after that episode, which we recorded about 2 years ago, I got so many letters from you guys, emails, requesting for us to do another show with Dr. Wong. And I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to have him back on the show because this is a topic that we can talk about. We can talk about it from a different perspective. He can talk about his experience, understanding as a psychologist and a cisgender heterosexual male. And I can talk about my experience as a heterosexual female. So Dr. Albert Wong is an associate professor and core faculty in the holistic counseling program at JFK University. He has been featured on PBS in Time magazine and the book The American Soul Rush. He was educated at Princeton, Oxford, and the University of Tennessee and is the recipient of numerous national science awards. He has a private practice that specializes in couples therapy in Bay Area. And you can find the link to his website in the show notes. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Albert Wong. Hello and welcome to another episode of Sexology Podcast. I am so excited and thrilled that I shared with you guys during the introduction to have Dr. Albert Wong back on our show. Dr. Wong, welcome to our show.
Oh, thanks so much, Naz. It's such a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
I am so excited to have you on this topic. I know we were briefly chatting about it before we started recording, based on, and I talked about it in the introduction, that I know you're a very humble and kind person, but I think based on my experience that I have from having interaction with you, I think you're one of the most likable person and psychologists that I know. So I thought would be a perfect person to have this conversation with, because we want what you have.
well, thank you. That's so kind and generous. So yeah, glad to share everything I know.
So let us start with, so we're going to talk about some of the challenges that men have when it comes to their skills, their feelings, their relationship in the bedroom. So what are some of the common sexual insecurities that you hear from your clients, from your friends, that they're struggling with?
Yeah, sure. So I think that kind of men are, sometimes there's this kind of machismo persona that men kind of present with, but I think at base there's a lot of insecurities, that men have, particularly around, am I good enough? Am I kind of a good enough person? Am I a good enough lover? Is my penis big enough? Did I perform well enough? All of these things that are really kind of tender and sad and just this, there's so much that men kind of struggle with. And it's really kind of heartbreaking, because what I see is that, there's so much self-doubt that people have, and kind of self-questioning and not knowing, am I enough, basically? And I think, this comes in kind of a lot of different forms, but mostly it centers around this underlying kind of question of, am I enough? Am I enough? And there's the common kind of ones about, am I big enough? Just in terms of size. And it's interesting, because there are, I think there's different answers to that. And I think that the things that at least I find are that kind of, there is some way in which, oh gosh, Nazanin, I don't know, I feel so awkward. This is, I guess it just shows some of the difficulties around kind of this question. But there's just so much anxiety, right, around kind of, am I enough, right? And I think if a fella asks kind of the question, kind of, is my penis large enough? I think it's kind of similar to the question that women sometimes ask when they kind of put on some clothes, and they ask the question, does this make me look fat? Mm-hmm. And there's a certain kind of no-win situation that the person who is answering the question kind of is put in. I noticed that I'm really stuck here. And I'm so sorry.
No problem. Tell me about the stuckness. Is it about the question? Do you feel there's something going on right now that you're kind of struggling? How can I help?
I don't know. I guess I'm noticing just my own kind of shame or challenges. And I think there's ways in which kind of I haven't sufficiently worked through some of these issues myself, maybe, which is fascinating. I mean, I think that's real, and on some level, there's my own kind of performance anxiety, right, which is manifesting right here, right now, and wondering if I am enough, or if by saying this, I'm talking about my own, penis size or not size or whatever that is, Right. And so I think it's fascinating just to see myself kind of in this state of like, am I enough? Right. Because I guess that's the underlying theme. Am I enough? And I think I guess we teach what we have to learn. I think kind of coming in as, I think somebody who is a pseudo expert on something where I feel somewhat an unexpert is an interesting kind of proposition. But, I think we can just kind of keep going and just go in with the flow of it. Sure. But yeah,
I think with the good enoughness thing that you talked about is such an important topic, because what I notice, especially kind of practicing in LA and like living here, that people try constantly to address the things on the surface. So only if I can do this testosterone thing and it makes me bigger, my body bigger, if I can do this penis enhancement thing, I feel better about myself. Only if I can have like more money. And I constantly see people on surface trying to address this issue that is so much deeper than what's going on. So I think it's interesting that just, I think, as you said, like at the core of it is feeling of, am I good enough? And that's what we need to address.
Yeah. No, I agree that there's so much kind of trying to be different than you are, right? And trying to become something kind of bigger, better, more status, more size, more prowess, or whatever that is. And that kind of one of the real keys to being or becoming a better lover is learning that you are enough, and that you know who you are, and that who you are is enough, and that you have what somebody wants, and I think that can be very compelling if you can get to a place where you're able to feel your own inner sense of self-confidence, like you know who you are, you know what you want, right? And that you have what your partner wants. Then that's a kind of a profoundly kind of empowered and attractive stance to take. And that can be kind of one of the elements in really generating the electricity that makes sexuality potent and powerful, right? Kind of this capacity for self-knowing, just self-acceptance, right? The capacity to be present just as you are. And the wisdom and competence and capacity just in being able to stand inside the sentence of, I know who I am, and you are what I want, and I know that I am, and I have what you want too. And when you can kind of get to that place of kind of standing in that potency, I think that can be really electric. I think there's kind of the surface issues, right? Just like you said, about kind of size and kind of more is better. And I think, I think a lot more is about attunement, about kind of being connected to people and listening, because you need a balance really of feeling kind of connected and safe, and then kind of the excitement and arousal. And so you need both. If you have kind of almost too much of one or the other, it actually kind of makes the intimacy kind of it fall apart a bit. So you need both ends of that. So, kind of learning how to communicate kind of with your partner, knowing what kind of turns them on, just knowing where their edges of where they're comfortable kind of is super important. So kind of becoming a highly attuned person, right? And helping kind of feel, kind of a sense of safety and freedom and play kind of in the intimacy is really important. Learning to speak and communicate kind of what gives your partner pleasure, and listen and take feedback on what kind of your partner wants. I think, so much of the time people just kind of expect that it should just happen, right? Like the lights go out or whatever it is, the candles are lit and there's this fireworks of sexual bliss, right? And so much of it is really much more about, being kind of steady and kind of willing to have the conversations about kind of what turns you on, what is your pleasure, and kind of explore different kinds of touch. Some people like lighter touch, firmer touch, kind of percussive touch, and different people have different edges on what their boundaries are, just in terms of what's a go and what's a no-go, what's a yes and what's kind of a boundary. So kind of learning how to talk kind of with your partner about these things is super important. I think, but I think on the whole, like if there was one piece of advice for men, particularly just in terms of like how to become better in terms of their capacity for becoming a better lover, I think kind of all of the kind of outer things are less important than kind of the actual interpersonal connection, right? If you have kind of a connection with somebody, and if you feel a certain level of attunement and contact, and when you can feel the joint feeling between the two of you, right? The energy that kind of runs through, that is something that feeds kind of on itself. It's almost like this kind of resonant capacity that you could have with another person. And when you're in touch with that, and you can sense into the other person's, sensitivities and their kind of their own arousal, I think that can be kind of extremely erotic. Just kind of maybe the most erotic thing is to have somebody who you feel connected with and is with you, right? And who is kind of tracking your erotic excitement alongside you. So, so learning to I think, and these things, like I think kind of it's the classic, I'll use the term masculine and feminine kind of as kind of more energetic tendencies, but kind of typically a more kind of masculine capacity is the capacity to kind of be penetrative or kind of assertive, right? But I think frequently what men also kind of need to develop is the capacity to be attuned, right? The capacity to listen and the capacity to really feel the erotic energy that their partner is experiencing, and when you can get to that level of kind of co-joint attunement, and then the whole range of play kind of develops. That there's this, if you can. So I think there's the first step is just learning to listen to kind of the physiological responsiveness, right, of your partner, right, and listen to kind of how they are. Just how their body is responding, how the body's responding and what's happening in terms of kind of levels of arousal. Because I think just in my experience and just talking about kind of my experience as a heterosexual cis male, I think one of the things that can be most deeply arousing for a partner is this sense that, okay, kind of their arousal of my partner, and then their capacity to feel that somebody's with them. And kind of, so there's this joint, sense of excitation, but then there's this sense of somebody's with me. So it's kind of a contained and held and safe experience. And so kind of that joint kind of interplay between, I'm with somebody, it's safe, and I'm kind of more deeply and more deeply excited. I can go further when I'm safer almost. So there's this kind of interplay between kind of attunement to create safety. And then, and once you have attunement, then you can also kind of notice what kind of activates greater arousal and what kind of helps a person kind of hold and contain the level of arousal. No, I'll just kind of riff a little bit here, but there are these notions kind of within the field of somatics just about kind of this idea of kind of the edge of kind of how to work with traumatic experience. And it's kind of interesting just in my thinking, just because there's a way in which the way you process through kind of things like trauma and the way where you kind of arrive at kind of deeper senses of interconnection are really, just very similar, in as much as kind of you need some level of safety, you need some level of connectedness and a home base, And then you need some level of kind of activation. You need to be able to kind of go into that territory and terrain but do it kind of in a way that feels both exciting, but safe, but exciting. So, yeah.
And I think that's such an important point that you're making, because I think most of the time as a cisgender, heterosexual female, I'm kind of thinking about, and also as a therapist that I work with lots of heterosexual couples, I see that when it comes to sexuality, one of the biggest challenges that I see that people are functioning from different templates. The stories that they have about what the great sex supposed to look like is so different, because I think with male and being kind of exposed to porn and conversations around things, it's just more focused on the performance and whether there's an erection or not, what size the penis is. For women and many men who work through these things, it's more about the attunement and being kind of like interpersonally being connected in that moment. That's arousing. So I wanted to say that's certainly something that I noticed that contribute to these ongoing challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. That kind of, there's lots of these kinds of projections and stories that we tell ourselves, that people tell themselves. And that attunement kind of really is something that, kind of is so much more valuable and more important. I think the insecurities go both ways, right? Kind of like, frequently for women, just this notion of, am I beautiful enough, right? Am I skinny enough, or am I kind of, is my body shaped appropriate, kind of sufficiently? And I think kind of my sense is that how connected can I be to a person, kind of regardless of shape or size or whatever. And it's really that which is most deeply kind of important, rewarding, valuable.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, that you were talking about being kind of truly present and paying attention to the other person's arousal and being kind of what's going on in their body and in the environment and all of that. And I know as a clinician, I know you as a friend and clinician, you're very good with reading like physiological responses, with kind of attuning with what's going on around you. And again, I think that's one of the things that makes you an excellent therapist as well. So, and I know that's certainly a challenge for everyone, but I think many, again, it's a generalization, and I'm sure there's so many men that are great with this, but many men, they have struggles and challenges when it comes to reading these things. So what is your recommendation for those group of people?
Yeah, I think the first step is really just to learn to become like connected to yourself, because I think it's really hard to connect to another person, right? Until you actually are able to connect kind of energetically with yourself in all your being. So I think sometimes the first step is just learning to feel your own kind of heart, your own belly, and your own sexuality, your own erotic energy and power, right? So, and just feeling the interconnectedness of all of that. I think a lot of men who come and see me sometimes, particularly with like these senses of insecurity, kind of have sometimes been shamed about sexuality, sometimes, kind of whether it's kind of a religious kind of, it's thou shalt not kind of thing, or, there's a feeling of, we don't talk about that and it's bad, and it's kind of, you shouldn't really, kind of be openly kind of physically sexual. So I think sometimes just healing that and letting themselves acknowledge and own their own erotic sexual being, kind of this notion of finding their own desire and not shaming themselves for it. I think sometimes there's kind of prohibitions, and I think sometimes it's appropriate. I think there's different ends of the spectrum. There are some men who are kind of like overly intrusive, right, with their sexuality. But, for whatever reason, most of the people who I see in my practice who come to me just relative to kind of sexual challenges are men who feel a little shyer or a little bit more insecure about kind of their sexuality, and who's kind of, I think some of the messaging which was intended for the kind of over-assertive, intrusive, dominant, kind of over-sexualizing man has actually trickled into kind of a certain kind of more sensitive guy, and the messages are being really felt in a way that kind of almost tips the pendulum back to the other side, where they start to kind of doubt whether it's okay to have desire, period. Whether desire itself should be thrown out the window, since there's so much kind of an atmosphere where they've seen, and rightfully so, some of the damage that kind of unbridled desire can have. Sometimes it gets completely shut off. And so kind of helping people, helping those categories of men kind of refine their kind of the energetic purity of just feeling their own erotic desire again, their own kind of healthy longing, and knowing that it's okay, and so sometimes, I think kind of there are times where there's, men have performance anxiety or challenges, or their penis doesn't get hard or whatever it might be, and sometimes it hasn't felt safe for them, right? And so kind of helping them kind of feel kind of that level of safety again, right? That, helping them feel understood or heard, or believing that they're okay and that their desire is okay and that they're welcomed and wanted, I think, and that's, something that kind of typically it's kind of a relational process with their partner, kind of becoming a better lover sometimes means becoming a better communicator and learning to talk about, kind of where they're at and what they need, what each person needs. And sometimes, it's a surprise, right? That people sometimes think that what's needed is kind of them to perform in a certain way, in a kind of certain quantity or magnitude. And frequently what's as satisfying is just having those kinds of connected conversations, So,
which can be so hard, because I think it's one of those catch-22 situations that you need the communication in order to have a good sex and being truly connected with your partner. But I think people are, at least what I see, that men are socialized to not show their vulnerability. And then they kind of get stuck in this cycle of, what am I doing? Am I enough? Am I doing it right? And then they have no way of knowing unless you communicate that with your partner, that this is I'm struggling with. And even showing the vulnerability, at least based on my experience, I can talk about my experience and people that are in my life, that can be incredibly sexy and attractive when someone truly shows their vulnerability.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true, that there is this kind of deeper level of kind of connection that takes place when you share kind of that really intimate part of yourself, that vulnerability, that scared part, and let a partner hold it with you. It's one of the sweetest things that can happen, and frequently sometimes it feels as important. Sometimes it's an undervalued aspect of the process of intimacy. Kind of that sometimes we prize kind of sexuality, kind of and kind of the genital act, right, of sex above kind of the emotional act, but both kind of are so intimate, so important. And just like you said, there's this kind of deeper vulnerability creates deeper intimacy creates better love, and I think sometimes there's this I mean, I think there's a reason why it's called making love as opposed to just having sex, right? And so kind of for people who are interested in that deeper level, I think kind of having that level of emotional contact is super important. Yeah.
So for people who are really struggling with, for example, talking about the things they want, specifically male, what are some of the first steps that you recommend them to kind of practice just being more open about their internal struggles?
Sure. So I think the first thing is just to, kind of just the notion of first truths first, right? So, if you're struggling to talk about it, just say that, you're struggling, and not to, you don't have to necessarily get into content, but, just to acknowledge that, there's a struggle. And then, and then once kind of you make that bid to your partner, typically, there'd be some capacity, on their part to hold and be with that and to kind of attend to that and then make it safe to kind of talk about the next thing, right? So, I think it's this kind of gradual easing in process of kind of sensing if I jump, and sometimes it does feel like jumping off the cliff, like, will my partner be there? And so it makes sense to kind of go with first truths first and sense the capacity kind of relative to the partner and to have faith, just to have faith that kind of maybe if you share from a place of vulnerability, that they'll come find you. And typically that's what, I find, like sometimes it feels super awkward or, but, if somebody's kind of cares about you, they'll show up, and then, I think a lot of it's kind of getting in contact with your deeper desires, right? Kind of just thinking about what's most meaningful for you. What's your, I think there's this term kind of in some of the literature just about kind of what is your kind of, what's your hottest erotic movie, right? Mm-hmm. Just this notion of kind of what turns you on, is it, and people are turned on by different things. Sometimes it's this notion of kind of romance, that sometimes a partner wants to feel this sense of, when I first met you, kind of my heart exploded with love and, just be kind of all these warm and loving, fuzzy feelings, that are associated with kind of romantic love. And some people kind of have kind of different senses of what turns them on. Some people are more kind of turned on by kind of dominance, like kind of somebody else kind of assuming the power, or kind of submission, or kind of just kind of unbridled passion being an object of intense desire, and so listening to what kind of is your deepest turn on and what is your partner's deepest turn on, and just trying to find, kind of open dialogue around that, So I think there's kind of learning about yourself, kind of accepting yourself, letting yourself just become present, present and here. A lot of people just kind of don't actually show up sometimes during intimacy. There's a lot of people who are kind of, the body's present, but the mind is elsewhere, or, kind of they're not really there. And so just kind of being conscious of when you are and when you're not, and being kind of self-accepting, I think is part of that, kind of learning to accept yourself. And then the attunement, a lot of that is, I don't know, it feels like listening to the kind of the soft and tender silences kind of with somebody, and just kind of things like noticing, and it's a feeling sometimes of just sensing into the other person's emotional, erotic being, right? And being kind of just listening, listening with the full heart and a full being. There is kind of, and it should be this way, like where you can sense the other person's arousal, right, as it's happening. And that's kind of what you want to kind of listen for, kind of listen for and get more and more kind of attuned to, kind of just, I think, watching and, if you've ever kind of been with somebody and there's a sense of in synchrony, that there's a resonant capacity. So letting yourself be open to the other person in that way, so that they can kind of, their energy spills over into yours and yours spills over into theirs, that creates a deeper sense of erotic tension and aliveness. And I think like attunement is, it just almost extending your awareness, like getting really good with your awareness, extending it to another person and letting that kind of enter into you somehow.
Beautiful analogy. And as I always, I loved having these conversations with you, because I feel, because of your insight and your also presence. But I know we're toward the end of our time. I wanted to know, what are some of the ways that our listeners can keep contact with you, contact you? And also, I know we were talking about, you have these courses that we would like to learn more about them.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So people are very welcome to connect with me. I have a website, dralbertwong.com. And yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, please feel free. I have a private practice in the Bay Area, kind of Marin County. Yeah, I'm also doing some online teaching. So there's kind of a course that I'm teaching on somatic approaches to trauma. So this is how to work through kind of challenges in the body, kind of from a somatic perspective. So if anybody has a side interest in that, people are definitely welcome to check that out for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And this was such a lovely conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Naz. It's always good to connect with you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview and conversation with Dr. Albert Wong. As I shared with you, I think many of the challenges that most of my cisgender male clients are struggling with is coming from the myth in the society. And I think there's just so much misinformation out there. After we stopped the recording, Dr. Wong and I, we had like another 10 minutes conversation about whether the size matters or not. And we talked about different perspectives, talked about our personal experiences and what science shows. And I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts about this topic. So if you think it matters or it doesn't matter, I want to hear it. You can just send me a tweet, find me on Instagram or Facebook, and let me know what you think. And a side note, I'm traveling, super excited, and going to a hiking trip in South America. So if you're following in my Instagram account at Oasis2Care, you can see the stories I'm uploading as I'm traveling in South America. Anyhow, I love you guys. Thank you so much for letting me know that this information is useful for you. And thank you so much for tuning in to this show. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the Sexology Podcast. For more great content, visit www.sexologypodcast.com. Please be advised that information presented on this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health provider.